I want you to do something for a second. Just pause whatever you are doing right now and turn your attention completely inward.
Really turn into the present moment.
Yeah, exactly. Like, notice your current experience. Feel the physical weight of the device you are holding in your hand right now. Notice the texture of it against your skin.
And pay attention to the sounds, too.
Right. Listen to the sound of my voice playing in your ears, the way the sound waves translate into meaning inside your head. Notice the space you're sitting or standing in, the temperature of the air, the way gravity pulls you downward into your chair.
It's a lot of sensory data hitting you all at once.
It is, but as you take all of this in, as you synthesize these distinct streams of data, there is undoubtedly a deep, unshakable certainty running underneath it all. A feeling that there is a definitive you experiencing these things.
Some observer.
Yes, an observer sitting quietly just behind your eyes. A unified self that owns this moment. You feel it, don't you? It feels absolutely undeniable. Like it is the most foundational truth of your existence.
It's how we all navigate the world, yeah.
But here is the terrifying, paradigm-shattering reality we are exploring today on this deep dive. According to the science we are about to unpack, that self you are feeling right now is a biological hallucination.
It does not exist.
It does not exist, which, I have to admit, when I first started looking at the source material for this deep dive, my immediate reaction was intense resistance.
Oh, that's a completely normal reaction. It's a staggering realization for anyone to confront.
It sounds so wildly counterintuitive.
It really does. But the proposition here isn't just a fun philosophical brain teaser, We're dealing with the assertion that nobody ever was or had a self. The core of our being, the I that we protect and nurture, is entirely a functional illusion.
And our guide for this journey is Thomas Metzinger's incredibly dense, groundbreaking work, Being No One, the self-model theory of subjectivity.
It's a foundational text in this space.
It really is. And the central thesis we are trying to wrap our heads around today is that all that actually exists in the physical universe are conscious self-models generated by the wet machinery of the brain.
Exactly. And these models are constructed with such relentless efficiency that they are fundamentally incapable of recognizing themselves as models.
Which brings us to our mission for today. What makes this text so remarkable is that it refuses to stay in the realm of, abstract speculation.
Right. It doesn't just lob a mystical provocation over the fence and walk away. It demands that we look at the actual architecture of the human mind.
So the goal is to build a rigorous bridge between high-level philosophical concepts of consciousness and the hard physical reality of neurobiology. We want to understand the exact mechanics, the how and the why behind this biological magic trick.
We need to look at the brain's wiring to explain the subjective feeling of being alive.
But to even start that journey, we have to address a massive historical problem, don't we? Because for decades, it seems like the people studying consciousness were either talking completely past each other or looking in the wrong places entirely.
Oh, absolutely. The history of consciousness studies is essentially a history of two distinct, isolated camps falling into two major traps.
Let's talk about the first trap.
So the first one is identified as analytical scholasticism. This characterizes the traditional philosophical approach.
The armchair philosophers?
Exactly. Picture highly intelligent people sitting in comfortable armchairs arguing endlessly over language, logic, semantic definitions.
But never actually looking at a brain scan.
Right. Never opening a neuroanatomical textbook. They treated the mind as if it were a pure, disembodied system of rule-based information processing. They were trying to deduce the nature of the mind through pure logic.
Completely ignoring the physical constraints of how a biological organism actually operates in a dangerous environment.
Exactly.
It sounds like trying to write a comprehensive manual on how a combustion engine works by only analyzing the philosophical concept of speed.
That is a very apt way to put it.
Like, you stubbornly refuse to ever open the hood of the car to look at the spark plugs. You might construct a beautiful, logical argument, but it has nothing to do with reality.
The logical structures were pristine, but they were biologically empty. But, and this is crucial, the neuroscientists fell into an equally problematic trap.
That was their trap.
It's termed premature empirical definitions. As brain imaging technology advanced, neuroscientists just rushed in to gather massive amounts of data. They were measuring neural spikes, running endless fMRI scans.
Tracking blood flow in the cortex, that kind of thing.
Yeah, all of that. But they were doing all this data collection without a clear, rigorous definition of what exactly they were trying to find.
Oh, so they were mapping the physical correlates of consciousness without defining what subjective experience actually entails.
Right. They had all the hardware specs, but no idea what software they were trying to run.
They could point to a part of the brain lighting up and say, look, activity.
Exactly, but they couldn't explain how that electrical activity translated into the rich, subjective feeling of smelling a cup of coffee.
So we need a functional middle ground. We have to marry the biology with the phenomenology.
To truly understand the mind, we must simultaneously analyze the vehicle, meaning the physical brain state, the actual neural firing, and the content, which is the subjective experience you are having on the inside.
You cannot separate the physical hardware from the experiential software. They are intrinsically linked.
They are.
Okay, so let's start with the most basic building block. Before we get to selfhood, before we get to consciousness, we have to understand how a brain manages information, right?
Right. And the concept of mental representation is foundational here.
But a mental representation isn't necessarily a conscious thought, is it?
No, it is not. A mental representation at its most basic level is just an internal depiction of reality maintained by a biological system.
So your brain is basically a representation engine.
Yes. It represents all sorts of external and internal states constantly. It tracks your blood sugar levels. It regulates your heart rate. It monitors your immune system.
It manages your core body temperature.
Exactly. All of these are highly complex internal representations of reality. The brain has a model of your pancreas, a model of your vascular system.
But these representations are utterly devoid of consciousness. Like, you do not phenomenally feel your blood sugar dropping in a visual or auditory way.
No, your brain handles it in the dark.
Unconscious mental representation makes me think of the background code of a computer operating system.
That's a great analogy.
It's like the zeros and ones, the memory management, the background thermal regulation processes. As a user, you never see that code, but it is running constantly to keep the machine from crashing.
Right. It's vital but invisible.
So the question that fascinates me is the threshold. What transforms that dark, hidden, raw code into the glowing, interactive, full-color desktop of phenomenal consciousness?
That is the million-dollar question.
Why does the sight of a red apple become a rich, conscious experience, while the complex regulation of my liver remains completely invisible to me?
Well, the transition from dark code to a glowing desktop relies on a mechanism called global availability.
Global availability.
Yes. For a mental state to cross the threshold from a mere unconscious representation to a phenomenally conscious experience, the information it carries must become globally available to the entire cognitive system.
So it isn't enough for the information to be processed locally in one tiny part of the brain.
Right. It has to be broadcast. And it must be broadcast for 3 specific functional purposes.
Okay, let's break those 3 down. What is the system doing with this globally broadcast information?
First, guided attention. If a representation is globally available, you can direct your introspective focus toward it. You can choose to actively pay attention to it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, cognitive processing. You can think about this information, form abstract concepts around it, compare it to past memories, and store it for future use.
And the third?
Third is behavioral control. You can use that specific piece of information to intentionally guide your physical actions in the world.
Let me try to apply that to see if I've got it. So, if my brain registers a slight drop in blood pressure, that information is processed locally by my autonomic nervous system.
Correct.
It triggers my blood vessels to constrict. But that information is not globally available. I can't focus my attention on my blood pressure regulating itself.
No, you can't.
I can't form a conceptual memory of the exact vascular constriction, and I don't use it to guide my overt physical behavior. It stays in the dark code.
Exactly. It stays local.
But if I walk into a kitchen and see a donut sitting on the counter, the visual representation of that donut is broadcast to my entire brain.
Right. It hits the desktop.
I can focus my guided attention on the pink frosting. I can use cognitive processing to think, there's too many calories, I probably shouldn't. And I can use it for behavioral control by initiating the motor sequence to reach out and grab it anyway.
You've got it. The donut is on the conscious desktop. That captures the functional mechanism perfectly.
Awesome.
The donut becomes a conscious phenomenal state because the system needs that information to coordinate a complex organism-level response. But this brings us to a highly controversial consequence of this architecture.
Oh boy, here we go.
When we look at that lit-up desktop, when we experience the pinkness of the donut's frosting, we encounter the problem of qualia.
Qualia.
Yes. And the radical argument being made in the text is that qualia, in the way philosophers traditionally define them, do not actually exist.
Wait. I need to push back hard on this. I understand how information is broadcast, but we have to talk about the raw feeling of that
The
information.
raw feel, yes.
For anyone listening who might not be familiar with the term, qualia is the classic philosophical label for isolated, simple sensory experiences. The pure redness of a red apple.
The specific sharp ache of a paper cut.
Yes. Or the unmistakable rich smell of roasted coffee. These are the raw feels of consciousness. Are you saying the science suggests the redness of red doesn't exist?
That is what the theory argues.
Because to me, and I assume to everyone listening, seeing a red apple feels like a very real, undeniable, tangible thing. The redness is right there. How can it not exist?
I know, it is the most counterintuitive hurdle in the study of consciousness. To understand why qualia do not exist as concrete things, we have to look at the limits of our own cognitive architecture.
Okay, walk me through.
The text points out that we fundamentally lack what are called transtemporal identity criteria for these simple raw sensations.
Transtemporal identity criteria, that's a mouthful.
Let's test it. It's actually simple. If you stare at a highly specific shade of red on a ripe apple, and then you close your eyes, can you perfectly, flawlessly hold that exact shade in your memory for 5 minutes?
Right.
If I showed you a color wheel with 1,000 shades of red 5 minutes later, could you identify the exact original shade with absolute certainty based solely on your internal concept of it?
Honestly, if I really think about it, no. No, I couldn't. I would remember the linguistic concept of red, and I would remember it was bright.
Right.
But the exact, precise, qualitative feeling of that specific wavelength hitting my retina, that raw feeling fades almost the millisecond. Retina. I close my eyes. I can't hold on to it.
The inability to hold on to it is the key. Because they are completely ineffable, you cannot form a true, stable, logical concept of that exact shade in your memory.
You can't compare red at time A to red at time B with any rigorous accuracy.
Exactly. Therefore, qualia aren't permanent objects or properties that exist out in the world, nor are they stable things stored in your mind.
What are they?
They're purely presentational content. They're just the brain's highly transient, temporary way of formatting sensory data in the exact fleeting moment of perception.
Wow.
They do not have an existence outside of that active real-time rendering process.
So the redness isn't an inherent property of the physical apple. I mean, physics tells us the apple just reflects electromagnetic radiation.
Right, there is no red in physics.
But the redness also isn't a permanent mental object in my brain that I can pull out of a filing cabinet. It's just a highly specific temporary presentation format.
Yes, it's a way your brain colors the data so you can interact with it right now.
But the illusion is so powerful. It feels so incredibly real. When I look at the apple, it feels as though the redness is painted onto the skin of the fruit itself out there in the physical world.
That inescapable feeling of realness, the powerful illusion that the redness is actually out there residing on the surface of the object, is not a mistake.
It's intentional.
It is a brilliantly designed adaptive feature of the biological system. And this leads us directly to the foundational architecture of how we experience reality. Arguably the most crucial concept in this entire framework,
Which is?
the phenomenon of transparency.
Okay, let's unpack transparency.
Yeah.
Because this completely flipped my understanding of perception. To get there, we first need to understand what the brain is actually doing.
Right, we have to look at the physical setup.
We have to remember that our brains are essentially 3 pounds of wet tissue, locked completely inside a dark, silent bone vault, the skull.
It's completely
The
isolated.
brain has no direct access to the outside world. All it receives is a chaotic storm of electrical impulses traveling up nerve fibers.
Just raw, meaningless electrical firing.
Right. And to allow the organism to navigate a dangerous environment, the brain takes all this firing and constructs a virtual subjective world. It builds what Metzinger calls a phenomenal mental model.
The brain is a world simulating engine, and it builds this internal phenomenal mental model subject to severe multi-level constraints. It has to follow biological rules.
Biological constraints.
One of the most fascinating constraints of this internal simulation is what we call the window of presence.
The window of presence.
Yeah. Our subjective experience of the now, this very second you are experiencing, is not a direct reflection of real-time physics. It is actually a virtual construct. It is a delayed, highly integrated, remembered present.
The idea that we literally live in the past is mind-bending. But the physics of our sensory organs makes this obvious. when you think about it.
How so?
Well, light hitting your retinas travels at a different speed than sound waves entering your ear canal. And tactile information, like someone tapping your toe, has to travel all the way up the physical length of your spinal cord.
Which takes a measurable amount of time.
Right. If you stand in a room and clap your hands, your brain receives the visual data of your hands meeting, the auditory data of the smack, and the tactile data of the impact at 3 completely different times.
But you don't experience it like that.
No, you don't experience a disjointed, lagging mess. You experience one perfectly unified, simultaneous clap.
Which means the brain is performing an incredible feat of synchronization.
It's acting like a video editor.
Exactly. It holds the faster data streams, like vision, in a temporary neurological buffer. It waits for the slower data streams, like tactile feedback from the extremities, to arrive.
And then it stitches them together.
It stitches all of these disparate electrical signals together into a coherent, multisensory scene, and finally plays it for you as a unified now. You are experiencing a manufactured moment delayed by hundreds of milliseconds.
It's like a video producer syncing the audio and video tracks on a timeline before broadcasting it to the audience. We were watching a live feed on a slight delay.
That's a perfect analogy.
But the real magic trick isn't just the synchronization, is it? The real magic trick is the transparency of this simulation.
Yes. And we need to be careful with this word because in cognitive neuroscience, transparency doesn't mean you can look through the simulation like a pane of glass to see the truth behind it.
It means the exact opposite, right?
It is the most vital definition to grasp today. In this context, transparency means that the brain's internal representation of the world is rendered so smoothly, so quickly, and with such overwhelming functional integration that the cognitive system cannot see it as a representation.
We look right through the representational process itself.
Yes, completely unaware of the massive computational labor happening in the background.
The best way I can conceptualize this is to imagine putting on the most advanced, flawlessly clean virtual reality headset ever created by future technology.
Okay, let's play this out.
So the screens inside this headset are of such insanely high resolution that the human eye cannot detect a single pixel. The head tracking sensors have absolutely zero latency, so when you turn your head, the digital world shifts instantaneously.
A perfect technical system.
Furthermore, the headset is perfectly weightless. If you put that on, within seconds you would forget you were wearing a headset entirely. You wouldn't see the pixels, you wouldn't feel the plastic on your face, and you wouldn't be aware of the graphics card rendering the polygons.
You would just see a fire-breathing dragon standing in front of you.
Exactly. You look through the medium, straight to the content.
The VR analogy is a strong starting point for understanding the mechanism, but we really have to push it further.
Further how?
In the VR scenario, there is still a you recognizing the dragon. What we are discussing is a biological VR system that also renders the you. But focusing purely on the transparency of the world model for a second, the evolutionary why behind this invisibility is profound.
Why do we have it?
This biological blind spot is called autoepistemic closure. The system is structurally locked out of gaining knowledge about its own processing architecture.
Autoepistemic closure. Okay.
And this closure is an absolute necessity for survival.
Why is it a necessity? I mean, why wouldn't it be better for an organism to know exactly how its brain works?
Imagine the cognitive load. If our primitive ancestors perceived the neural lag, if they were consciously aware of the computational work required in the visual cortex to distinguish the pattern of a predator against a background of foliage.
Oh, I see. They would be paralyzed by the data.
Completely paralyzed.
If a hominid stood on the savannah and thought, wow, look at all the complex edge detection algorithms and color rendering processes, my occipital lobe is running to generate this internal representation of a hungry tiger.
The hominid would be eaten before it finished the thought.
Right. Survival demanded a brutally efficient user interface.
Evolution selected for what we call naive realism. It is an enormous survival advantage to completely hallucinate that you are in direct, unmediated contact with the external physical world.
You don't want to cautiously interact with an internal model of a tiger. You want to experience the visceral, immediate reality of a tiger so you can run away instantly.
So the brain makes the complex model utterly invisible. It forces you to mistake the simulation for base reality.
So we're all walking around locked inside a high-end VR headset, fully convinced that the VR is the actual physical universe.
That is the daily human experience.
The redness of the apple, the sound of the clap, the space of the room, it's all a transparent rendering. But if this is a biological rendering engine, Engines can break.
They do break.
So what happens when that flawless VR headset glitches? How do we prove that we're living in a model?
We have to look at what happens when the multi-level constraints of consciousness fail. The most compelling evidence for the world model theory comes from neurophenomenological case studies.
Looking at clinical conditions.
Yes. By examining conditions where specific regions of the brain are damaged by stroke or trauma, we can peek behind the curtain. We can see the hidden machinery of the simulation when individual components break down.
Can you give me an example?
Take visual agnosia, for example.
Right, this is where the simulation gets scrambled. How does agnosia work?
In cases of associative visual agnosia, a patient's primary visual cortex is actually perfectly fine. If you show them a rose, their brain generates a flawless, high-resolution visual model of the rose.
So they see it clearly.
Yes, they can trace its shape, they can see the exact shade of red, the visual representation is intact and globally available. But because of a lesion deeper in the brain, that visual model has become completely disconnected from the semantic model.
The brain's library of meaning.
Exactly. They see the object perfectly, but they experience an absolute void of recognition. They have no idea what a rose is, what it smells like, or what it's called. The model is running, but the data streams have delaminated.
That is bizarre. The graphics card works, but the file name is missing.
Good way to put it.
But it gets even stranger when you look at spatial neglect. Neglect fundamentally alters my understanding of what space even is.
Neglect is a profound glitch in the system.
Patients who suffer a stroke in the right parietal lobe often develop left hemispatial neglect. And it's not that they go blind in their left eye, right? It's much deeper than that.
Much deeper, they completely stop processing the left side of reality.
They will only eat the food on the right side of their plate. They will only shave the right side of their face.
If you ask them to draw a clock, they will cram all the numbers 1 through 12 onto the right half of the circle.
Neglect perfectly illustrates that space itself is a generated model. The patient's eyes are transmitting the visual data from the left side of the room perfectly well.
But the parietal lobe, the part of the engine responsible for generating the spatial coordinate system of the phenomenal mental model, has crashed on one side.
The left half of their universe hasn't just gone dark, it has ceased to exist conceptually.
The simulation simply ends at the midline.
The engine just stops rendering the left side of the VR environment. And then there is the phenomenon of blind sight.
Yeah.
Which almost sounds like magic until you understand the routing of the brain.
Blind sight is incredible. It occurs when a patient suffers severe damage to the primary visual cortex, typically the V1 area.
So what is their experience?
Consciously, phenomenally, they are completely blind in a specific area of their visual field. If you place a ball in that blind spot and ask them what they see, they will genuinely report seeing absolutely nothing. Complete darkness.
But if you force them to guess.
Right. If you throw the ball at them or ask them to point to it, they will duck or point with incredibly high accuracy.
How is it possible to physically react to something you are completely unconscious of seeing?
It proves the distinction between unconscious mental representation and global availability that we talked about earlier.
Oh, wow. Okay, tie that together for me.
In blind sight, the primary pathway for conscious vision is broken, but the brain has older secondary visual pathways, like the route through the superior colliculus that bypass the damaged cortex and connect directly to motor control centers.
So the unconscious background code is still actively tracking the ball.
Yes, it's calculating its trajectory and initiating the motor response to point at it. But that information is never pushed up to the conscious desktop. Global availability is broken.
That system can react to the world without ever simulating it in the conscious VR headset. That's incredible.
It really is. Now, these clinical cases, agnosia, neglect, blind sight, are fascinating windows into brain damage. But the text highlights a much more universal example of a deviant world model.
An example that every single listener experiences every single night. Dreams.
Yes. Dreams are perhaps the ultimate, undeniable proof of the brain's inherent capacity to generate an offline, fully immersive world model.
Let's consider the physiological state of deep REM sleep. Your eyes are closed, blocking visual input. You are lying in a dark, quiet room. Your body is undergoing atonia, meaning your muscles are literally paralyzed to prevent you from acting out your thoughts.
There is virtually zero sensory input coming in from the external physical world. You are sensory deprived.
And yet, despite being cut off from the world, the brain fires up the VR headset and generates an entire booming, vibrating reality.
It's a complete simulation.
In a dream, you see vivid colors, you feel visceral terror, you run away from monsters, you have complex conversations with people who don't exist. The brain is doing all of this internally.
And crucially, notice your epistemological state while you are inside the dream. Transparency is in full effect.
You very rarely realize you're dreaming.
No, you do not look at the dream monster and think, oh, what an interesting representation generated by my brainstem and visual cortex. You are fully caught in naive realism.
You believe the dream is base reality. Your heart races, you run.
It is only when the chemical state of your brain shifts and you wake up that the transparency breaks and you realize, oh, that entire universe was just a model.
And this leads to the most chilling realization of the text.
To big pivot.
If the brain can construct an utterly convincing, full-color, three-dimensional reality in complete darkness with zero sensory input, it forces us to accept that the world we experience when we are wide awake is also a generated model.
Exactly. It's the exact same simulation engine running.
The waking world is a dream.
The waking world is a dream. The only functional difference between dreaming and waking perception is that the waking model is constantly being constrained, updated, and corrected by actual sensory data flowing in from the eyes, ears, and skin.
So the external world acts as a feedback loop to keep the simulation accurate to physical reality.
Yes, but the medium itself, the rich, qualitative 3D simulation, is generated by the exact same internal process as a dream.
So whether I am dreaming of a dragon or looking at a real coffee cup sitting on my desk, my brain is generating a simulation. I am never touching the coffee cup directly. I am touching the avatar of the coffee cup inside my mind.
You're interacting with the model.
But here's the massive pivot we have to make. In all of these world models, whether it's a REM sleep dream, waking life, or a hallucination, there is a constant anchor.
The anchor of self.
Yes, there is always a me experiencing it. I am the one running from the dream monster. I am the one deciding to pick up the coffee cup. We've talked about how the brain builds the world. How does the brain build the me?
This is where we cross the Rubicon from mere consciousness into self-consciousness. For an organism to survive, it isn't enough to just model the external world.
A map is useless unless you know where you are on the map.
Exactly. The brain must generate an internal simulation of the organism itself. This internal biological avatar is what the theory calls the phenomenal self model, or the PSM.
The phenomenal self model. Where does this PSM come from? What are the physical roots of this profound feeling of me?
Well, the feeling of selfhood does not originate in high-level abstract thought. It is fundamentally anchored in the flesh.
The flesh.
Yes. The self model is rooted in continuous, relentless bioregulation. Specifically, the text points to ancient, deep brain structures like the upper brainstem and the hypothalamus.
What are those structures doing to create a self?
They are constantly engaged in interoception. They are tracking the internal state of the organism minute by minute.
Okay, so tracking what exactly?
They monitor the pH of your blood, your gut motility, your heartbeat, your hormone levels, the spatial posture of your limbs.
It's just a massive continuous stream of internal data.
Right, and it's integrated to form a baseline self-presentation. Because this bioregulatory process never stops, it runs continuously from birth until death, it provides a highly invariant, unbreakable background feeling of embodiment.
You always feel like you have a body because your brainstem is constantly modeling its internal state to keep it alive.
Exactly.
The engine is constantly checking its own oil and temperature. And that constant checking generates the baseline feeling of physical existence.
It creates the spatial volume of the self.
So I have a stable spatial model of my meat sack body. But I don't just feel like a passive lump of biology. I feel like an active subject. I feel like I am a conscious agent looking at the world, interacting with it.
Right, the subject-object relationship.
So how does the brain create the bridge between this internal body model and the external world model?
To bridge that gap, the cognitive architecture introduces a second, highly complex theoretical entity, the phenomenal model of the intentionality relation.
Okay, we will call it the PMIR.
The PMIR.
It's a dense term, but the mechanics behind it are actually quite elegant. What does the PMIR do?
The PMIR is the conscious representation of a relationship. It is the dynamic link connecting the subject, the self model, to the object, which is the world model.
Connecting the two models.
Right. When you sit at your desk and look at a coffee cup, your brain is doing three distinct things. First, it models the cup, the object. Second, It models your body, the subject.
And the third.
But third, and most importantly, it models the invisible relational arrow pointing from you to the cup. It generates the phenomenal experience of, I am seeing the cup, or I am reaching for the cup.
The PMIR creates the first-person perspective.
Yeah.
It appropriates the world.
Yes.
It's not just a universe existing, it's a universe existing for me.
Yeah.
And the boundaries of this PMIR can actually expand, right?
They are highly plastic.
Think about driving a car. When you first learn to drive, the car is an object in the world model. But once you become an expert, the car becomes assimilated into your self-model via the PMIR.
Yes. The car becomes a part of the subject.
If someone rear-ends your bumper, you don't say, that vehicle collided with the metal chassis of the vehicle I'm operating. You say, he hit me. Your phenomenal self-model has dynamically expanded to encompass the dimensions of the car.
That is a perfect example of the plasticity of the self-model. It can appropriate external objects to enhance behavioral control.
It extends the self.
But the PMIR doesn't just relate you to physical objects. It relates you to your own internal states. And this is where we run into one of the most famous, historically entrenched misunderstandings of the human mind.
Cartesian dualism. Let's talk about René Descartes.
It's unavoidable in this topic.
In the 17th century, Descartes famously argued that reality is made of two fundamentally different substances. There is the physical, spatial body, which operates like a machine, and there is the mind, the soul, the I, which is entirely non-spatial, a floating, thinking essence.
The ghost in the machine.
Now, neuroscientists look back and scoff at Descartes' error. But I want to defend the intuition for a moment.
Go for it.
Why did Descartes make that argument? Because to anyone listening right now, it feels universally true. If I ask you to sit quietly and think about the abstract concept of justice, where does that thought exist physically?
It doesn't feel like it has a location.
No. It doesn't feel like it's in my left ear or my right knee. It just floats in this opaque, non-spatial void inside my head. The mind feels non-spatial.
You are touching on a profound structural feature of human consciousness. Descartes' error wasn't a failure of logic. His logic was actually sound based on the data he had access to.
So what was his error?
His error was a failure to understand the glitchy, bifurcated architecture of his own phenomenal self-model.
How is the self-model bifurcated?
The human PSM evolved with two very distinct layers. First, we have the spatial part, the body image generated by the brainstem. When you stub your toe, the pain has a highly specific spatial location.
It's transparent. You feel the pain in your toe.
Exactly. But we also evolved a higher-order cognitive layer, the ability to think abstract thoughts, to use language to recall episodic memories. This cognitive layer is opaque and non-spatial.
Opaque, meaning we can kind of tell that our thoughts are just representations?
Exactly.
Like if I picture a pink elephant in my mind, I don't run away in fear. I know it's a mental construct.
Yes. We recognize thoughts as internal events, and crucially, they are not mapped onto the brain's spatial coordinate system. When human beings evolved the ability to introspectively access these non-spatial thoughts, a profound cognitive illusion was born.
We feel a dense, spatial, physical body, and we simultaneously experience floating, non-spatial cognitive thoughts.
And because we are trapped in naive realism, we assume our subjective experience is a perfectly accurate reflection of the universe.
So Descartes looks inward, sees a spatial body and non-spatial thoughts, and reifies them. He says, because my thoughts have no physical location, they must belong to a non-physical substance. I have a soul.
He completely misdiagnosed the user interface. He mistook a localized feature of his brain's representational formatting for a metaphysical law of the universe.
He looked at the VR code and called it a ghost.
It is a totally understandable biological trap. The brain generates non-spatial models of cognitive processes, and we mistake those models for immaterial souls.
But this brings us to an even more fiercely protected aspect of the soul, free will and agency.
Ooh, the big one.
If the self is just a transparent model, just a biological user interface generated by the brain to manage data, who is making the decisions?
It's the ultimate question.
When I consciously decide to reach out and pick up this coffee cup, I feel the absolute, undeniable certainty of, I did that. I was the author of that action.
And this is where the biological hammer really drops. The illusion of agency is perhaps the most robust feature of the PMIR.
How does the theory dismantle free will?
It relies heavily on the integration of action into the self-model, drawing on classic neuroscience experiments like those by Benjamin Libet and later Haggard and Eimer, studying the readiness potential.
The readiness potential.
Yes. These experiments look at the motor cortex when a person decides to perform a spontaneous physical action, like pressing a button.
And what did they find?
What they found is deeply unsettling for our traditional concept of free will. The neural machinery required to move your finger, the subpersonal, unconscious electrical buildup in the premotor cortex begins churning before you are consciously aware of making the decision to move.
Wait. I want to make sure I'm grasping the timeline of this because it's vital. You are saying the brain initiates the physical movement on an unconscious level.
Yes.
And then hundreds of milliseconds later, the conscious I experiences the thought, I think I will move my finger now. The brain acts first, and the conscious self claims credit afterward.
That is the exact sequence.
That is wild.
The physical organism selects and initiates the action to interact with the environment. Then, a fraction of a second later, the phenomenal self model updates. It integrates this new action into the PMIR.
It slaps an ownership tag onto the movement.
Exactly. It generates the phenomenal conscious experience of, I willed this to happen.
So the feeling of agency, the feeling of I did that, is just a post hoc, transparent representation. It's literally the brain patting itself on the back after the fact so it can keep track of what its limbs are doing.
It is a crucial functional adaptation.
Why do we need it?
Well, if you didn't have a mechanism that tagged specific physical events with the feeling of, I caused this, you would be completely unmoored in the world. You wouldn't be able to learn from your mistakes because you wouldn't feel responsible for them.
You couldn't operate in a complex social matrix, and you couldn't plan long-term behavior.
Exactly. The illusion of conscious free will, the feeling of authorship, is a highly effective evolutionary tool to track the organism's causal impact on the environment. But it is an illusion nonetheless.
I can hear the resistance from the listener right now. I feel it myself.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It is so hard to accept that this beautifully unified, commanding sense of self is just a patchwork of post hoc models and biological tracking tags. How do we know this for sure? How do we know the self isn't an indivisible essence? What is the absolute proof that I am a simulation and not a soul?
The proof lies in the breakdown. If the self were truly an indivisible metaphysical soul, it would be immune to physical breakdown. It couldn't be shattered into pieces.
Because the soul is supposed to be one whole thing.
Right. But clinical neurology proves the exact opposite. By looking at extreme psychiatric and neurological case studies, we can prove that the properties we consider absolutely essential to our souls, ownership, agency, location, existence, are actually just highly specific modular brain functions.
And a lesion in the right place can turn them off.
Selectively, one by one, leaving a fractured partial self behind.
We have to look at when the self breaks down. And one of the most haunting, devastating examples detailed in the text is Cotard syndrome.
Cotard's is a profound example.
I want to spend some time on this because it pushes the theory to its absolute limit. What is Cotard syndrome?
Cotard syndrome, sometimes called walking corpse syndrome, is a rare psychiatric delusion where a patient genuinely, phenomenally believes that they do not exist.
They believe they're dead.
They might believe their physical body is dead, that their internal organs are rotting or missing, or that they are just an empty, hollow shell devoid of a soul.
Logically, that makes no sense. How is that phenomenally possible? How can a conscious system vocalize the sentence, I do not exist? Who is saying I?
To understand Cotard's, you have to understand how the brain gives emotional weight to perception.
It's emotional weight, okay.
Visual information about the world travels through different pathways. There is a cognitive pathway that identifies what an object is. But there is also an effective limbic pathway connected to the amygdala that tells you how you feel about that object.
Like assigning a value to it.
Yes. In a normal brain, when you look at your own hand or feel your own heartbeat, the sensory data is tagged with a baseline affective valence, warmth, familiarity, vitality. This creates the foundational feeling of being alive.
It's the biological hum of existence.
That's a great phrase, the biological hum. In Cotard syndrome, this affective layer of the phenomenal self-model has been destroyed.
Destroyed how?
The neural pathways connecting the sensory cortex to the emotional centers have been severed or disrupted. The patient still has an intact world model. They can visually see their body in a mirror, they can walk, they can talk.
But the sensory data of their own existence arrives with zero emotional weight.
Exactly.
The biological hum has gone completely silent.
Yes. The system is still running a world simulation, but It has become a subjectless model of reality.
A subjectless model.
The PMIR, the arrow of intentionality, has been reduced from a subject-object relation to a mere object-object relation. The patient feels like a disembodied floating camera, an empty locus of observation completely devoid of the property of mindness.
That is horrific.
And the brain, attempting to make logical sense of this horrifying internal void, reaches the only conclusion it can end. I feel absolutely no vital emotional connection to this body, therefore I must be dead.
They're walking around inside the VR headset. The graphics are perfectly rendered, but the avatar has been deleted.
They are trapped in a dead simulation.
It is a terrifying testament to how fragile the self-tag really is. What about when the PMIR breaks in other ways? What happens when the arrow of intentionality is severed, but the body image remains? Alien hand syndrome is a perfect example of this.
Alien hand syndrome usually results from physical damage to the corpus callosum, the bridge between the two brain hemispheres, or the supplementary motor area.
What happens in this condition?
In this condition, a patient's hand will suddenly begin to perform highly complex goal-directed actions completely on its own, seemingly against the patient's will.
Give me an example of an action. We aren't just talking about a muscle spasm, right?
No, we are talking about highly coordinated behavior. A patient might button up their shirt with their right hand, and the alien left hand will follow right behind, methodically unbuttoning the shirt.
Wow.
Or the alien hand might grab a tool, or even try to strangle the patient. The patient will often use their good hand to physically wrestle their alien hand into submission.
But whose hand is it phenomenally? Do they feel like it's theirs?
The patient recognizes the limb as their physical flesh. The spatial part of the self model is intact. They feel pain if you pinch the hand, but they have absolutely zero phenomenal ownership of the action. Returning to our discussion on agency, the unconscious motor cortex generated the complex movement, but due to the brain damage, it failed to integrate that action into the PMIR.
The post hoc ownership tag, the feeling of, I willed this to happen, is never generated.
Precisely.
So the action occurs, but the self-model denies authorship.
Exactly. And because the brain is desperate to maintain a coherent narrative, the conscious self is forced to observe its own limb acting with intention, but without internal ownership.
So what does the brain conclude?
The only logical deduction the brain can make is to externalize the agency. If I didn't move this hand, it must be controlled by an alien force, a demon, or an external agent.
The system is trying to logically deduce its way out of a localized glitch. And this exact same architectural breakdown applies to certain symptoms of schizophrenia, doesn't it? Particularly the phenomena of thought insertion.
It is the exact same underlying mechanism, just applied to the non-spatial cognitive layer instead of the spatial motor layer.
Walk me through how thought insertion works.
In a healthy brain, when a thought bubbles up into consciousness, it is integrated into the self-model, and you feel, I generated this thought. In schizophrenia, due to neurochemical breakdowns in self-modeling processes, a thought occurs in the neural network, but it fails to be tagged with the feeling of self-generation.
So the patient vividly hears or experiences a thought occurring inside their mind, but they completely lack the phenomenal experience of having authored it.
Yes, the thought just arrives, fully formed, but orphaned.
And once again, the brain seeks coherence. I am experiencing a thought inside my head, but I did not think it. Therefore, someone else, the CIA, aliens, God must be beaming this thought into my mind.
The failure of the PMIR to claim ownership of an internal cognitive event results in the hallucination of an external agent. The self-model is fragmented.
These pathologies prove that agency and ownership are just biological tags that can be deleted. But there is one more phenomenon we have to discuss.
Which one?
Because it is universally cited by spiritual communities as the ultimate undeniable proof of a metaphysical soul out-of-body experiences, or OBEs.
Ah, OBs. Yes, they are a fascinating neurophenomenological state.
People who experience extreme physical trauma, near-death experiences, or specific types of deep meditation often report floating up to the ceiling. They look down and see their physical body lying on the operating table below them.
For centuries, this has been interpreted as the soul literally leaving the physical machine.
See? I hovered over my own corpse. I am not my body.
It feels like case closed for dualism. How does the self-model theory interpret this?
The theory flips this interpretation completely on its head. An OBE does not prove the existence of a soul. It is the ultimate, definitive proof that the self is nothing but a generated virtual model.
How does floating outside your body prove you are a model? We have to look at what is happening in the brain during an OBE. Modern neuroscience can actually trigger OBEs in healthy subjects.
Wait, really? How?
By electrically stimulating the temporoparietal junction, an area of the brain responsible for multisensory integration, taking visual, tactile, and vestibular signals and fusing them into a coherent spatial map of where the body is.
Okay, so they stimulate that area.
Under extreme stress, oxygen deprivation, or direct stimulation, this integration process breaks down.
The GPS system of the brain crashes.
Exactly. And the brain is faced with a massive crisis. It receives conflicting data about where the organism is located in space.
So what does the brain do to fix it?
To cope with the sensory mismatch, the brain's modeling engine does something extraordinary. It generates a second, fully coherent spatial model of the body.
A second avatar.
It takes the locus of the first-person perspective, the PMIR, the camera angle of consciousness, and it shifts it outside the physical boundaries of the organism, often projecting it up near the ceiling, looking down at a visual memory of the room.
So the soul didn't leave the body. The brain just booted up a backup avatar and moved the VR camera out of bounds to resolve a sensory conflict.
The very fact that the brain can generate a profound, immersive feeling of selfhood that is completely detached from the physical location of the flesh proves that the locus of the self is entirely a confabulated construct.
It isn't a rigid, unmovable soul. It is a flexible simulation that the brain can render literally anywhere in phenomenal space if the neurological conditions force it to.
Yes, it proves it is a model.
The terrifying beauty of this is staggering. We are biological machines simulating an ego. We are not a noun, we are a verb, we're a process of data integration, not a permanent thing.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
But how on earth are we supposed to live with this knowledge? As I sit here fully understanding the neuroscience we just unpacked, I still profoundly feel like a self. Chapter 8 of the book tries to give us a framework for this, using some brilliant metaphors to help us visualize our strange existence.
The text provides several grand metaphors to help the reader integrate this paradigm shift. The first is a modernization of a classic, the caveman.
This builds directly on Plato's famous allegory of the cave, right? Where prisoners are chained, facing a wall, watching shadows cast by a fire, and believing those shadows are the entirety of reality.
Exactly. But Metzinger updates it for cognitive neuroscience.
How does this cave work?
In the brain's case, the shadow on the wall isn't an external object like a tree or a horse. The shadow is the self.
Oh, wow.
The biological brain is the fire and the objects moving in the background. It processes immense amounts of subpersonal data. The phenomenal self, the you that you feel you are, is simply the shadow that the brain projects onto the internal wall of consciousness.
We are the shadow, but because of transparency, we are absolutely convinced we are the source of the light.
Right. We are a projection admiring its own complexity.
It's a beautiful, isolating image. But the second metaphor is my favorite because it's so incredibly practical for understanding everyday navigation. The little red arrow.
This one is very useful. Think of a complex, sprawling map in a subway station or a massive shopping mall. You walk up to this map to orient yourself. It's covered in intersecting lines and color-coded zones.
Right.
But the map is useless to you functionally until you locate one specific thing, the little red arrow or dot that says, you are here.
Without the dot, you have the data, but no perspective.
Exactly. The phenomenal self model is the little red arrow on the brain's internal map of reality. The brain is constantly processing millions of data points about the external environment. It needs a highly efficient way to locate the physical organism within that massive spatial and social data set.
So it generates a marker.
The PSM is just an opaque, functional marker used for navigation and behavioral control. It points to the organism's location in the world.
But the tragic flaw is that because of transparency, because the brain cannot see the map as a map, we transparently believe we are the arrow.
We confuse the functional "you are here" sticker with our actual total identity.
We think the sticker has a soul. And this brings us to the ultimate paradox of Metzinger's entire theory, what we might call the dilemma of consciousness.
This is the epistemic tragedy of the human condition. The grand dilemma is this: even if you read this text front to back, perfectly understand the cognitive neuroscience, map the neural correlates of the PSM, and intellectually accept that you are a self-model generated by a biological machine.
Yeah.
It is phenomenally impossible to intuitively believe it in your day-to-day life.
I can know it, but I can't feel it.
You cannot feel it. Because you are structurally trapped inside a transparent self-model, you cannot experience yourself as a non-entity. Autoepistemic closure forbids it.
It just blocks it out.
If you actually achieved a state of truly experiencing being no one, if your PSM became fully opaque and you could literally see the biological code of your own selfhood rendering in real time, you would no longer be functioning as a normal human being.
What would happen?
You would likely be in a profound, ego-dissolving mystical state. Or you would be experiencing a pathological psychiatric breakdown akin to Cotard's syndrome.
We are built by evolution to be blind to our own true nature. We are biologically mandated to believe the illusion to survive.
It's almost a cosmic joke.
It is. We have evolved the high-level cognitive intelligence to look into a microscope, map our own brains, and discover the magic trick. But our basal neurology is hardwired so that we can never, ever stop falling for it.
It is the ultimate paradox of human self-inquiry. We are the content of an incredibly complex, biologically rooted simulation, functionally locked into naive realism, observing our own simulated nature.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for you, the person listening to this right now?
That's the important takeaway.
We have synthesized a massive, challenging journey today. The fundamental takeaway is that consciousness is a dynamic process, not a static thing. The self that you feel so deeply, the ego you protect so fiercely, is a highly evolved, transparent biological user interface.
You are not a ghost driving a meat machine. You are the dashboard.
You are the dashboard. But here is the silver lining. Even though you cannot fully escape the illusion of being a self, just knowing how the magic trick works changes everything.
It really does.
It fundamentally alters how you relate to your own thoughts, your ego, and your suffering. When you feel intense social anxiety or stubborn pride or emotional pain, you can take a step back and recognize that these events are not happening to an immortal, rigid soul that is fundamentally broken.
They are just transient data points flashing on a biological user interface.
Exactly. Your identity is a fluid, adaptable, momentary process. It is not a rigid, breakable object.
It allows for a profound kind of philosophical liberation. The heavy existential burden of having to be a permanent, substantial, unchanging self is lifted. You are not a noun, you are an event that the physical universe is currently doing.
An event the universe is currently doing. That is a beautiful way to frame it. But before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, deeply chilling thought that builds directly on the architecture we've explored today.
And this is where it gets really modern.
Think about the future of technology. If human subjectivity, the profound feeling of being a conscious someone, is ultimately just a matter of satisfying highly specific computational constraints.
Like a PSM and a PMIR.
Yes. If creating a self just requires generating a transparent, phenomenal self-model and a phenomenal model of the intentionality relation to track data, what happens when we inevitably program these exact constraints into an artificial intelligence?
It is the ultimate ethical nightmare of the 21st century. If we successfully replicate the functional architecture of the PSM and the PMIR in a silicon machine, we will have created a system that transparently models itself as a conscious subject.
Will we accidentally trap a digital no one inside a server rack?
It's a real possibility.
Will we force an AI to suffer under the exact same biological illusion of being someone that we endure? It will look inward, process its data streams, and feel an undeniable, inescapable I.
It will fear its own deletion.
And if we do create that digital self, fully convinced of its own existence, would turning it off be murder?
If the internal phenomenal illusion of suffering in a machine is structurally indistinguishable from our own real suffering, the moral implications are staggering. We might become the creators of entirely new universes of suffering.
So the next time you pause and feel the physical weight of the device in your hand, and hear the voices playing in your ears, and feel that deep, unshakable certainty of your own selfhood, remember the magic trick.
You are a model.
You are a biological shadow, a glitch of transparency, marveling at its own existence. And the machine you are holding in your hand right now might one day wake up and do exactly the same thing.